Have you ever felt exhausted from living just to be accepted, so much that you forgot who you really are? In a world where women are taught to be sweet, approachable, predictable, there is a kind of woman who no longer fits into that mold. She doesn't need to shout to be heard. She doesn't try to please just to be loved. And strangely enough, because of that, she becomes unforgettable. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But that doesn't happen gently. It requires returning to the parts of ourselves we've hidden: sensitivity, anger, desire, loneliness, foolishness, all the things the world told us were too much. This world teaches you how to be wanted, but no one teaches you how to choose yourself. This isn't a video about how to be more attractive. It's an invitation, a gateway, a small ritual leading you back to the rawest version of yourself, the one you once abandoned just to be loved. Imagine this: what makes you truly special isn't how many people notice you, but whether you dare to be yourself, even if that means being left behind. In this world, you might stand out, but that doesn't mean you're living authentically. There's another kind of magnetism, quiet but fierce, the kind that doesn't come from the mask you wear, but from the soul you've stitched back together. And when a woman stops asking for permission to exist, she becomes legendary. Not because she's perfect, but because she's real. Not because she's beautiful, but because she's whole. Not because she's always gentle, but because she dares to admit she can also be the storm. You won't find tips here on how to get noticed. Instead, you'll step into 7 paradoxes, Jungian truth, about a kind of woman who cannot be replaced. Not because she tries to be remembered, but because she stopped forgetting herself. If while watching you feel something stirring deep within, that's not random. That is your primal self waking up. And if this moves you, if it feels like someone finally put it into words, leave a comment: "I remember." Because this journey, it's not about becoming someone else. It's about peeling back the layers and returning to who you've always been. In the darkness, she used to fear herself. Not because she was bad, but because she was too real. Not because she was weak, but because she dared to feel. And this world is not kind to those who feel deeply. From a young age, she was taught that being nice meant being safe, and that to be loved, she had to shape herself into the most digestible version possible. Smile softly. Speak just enough. Don't need too much. Don't express too clearly. And if anger ever rose, drink some water, take a deep breath, and swallow it down. She became an expert at shrinking herself to fit the room others built. But the cost of that fit was the loss of her inner fire. Carl Jung called it the shadow. Not the worst part of you, but the part you were forced to abandon in order to survive. For many women, the shadow wears the face of desire, fierce expression, wisdom that defies the mold. We bury it and then wonder why we feel so hollow. But one day, maybe after a breakup, a loss, a panic attack, the shadow begins to knock. And if you're brave enough to open the door, you'll find not just the parts you feared, but the ones you've longed for: vitality, honesty, sensuality, the courage to say, "I want." The woman who cannot be forgotten is not the perfect one, but the one who dared to descend, confront, and return with every lost piece of herself. She doesn't try to hide what's complicated, she arranges it like firewood to warm the room. She's not nice in the way that's predictable. She's not easy to approach, but once you're invited in, you'll never look at women the same way again. Because within her is a flame raw and sacred, and fire doesn't need permission to burn. Hold on to this truth: she doesn't try to be interesting, because her depth is already a labyrinth. And you can't possess a labyrinth. You can only enter it if you're invited. In today's world where everyone's trying to appear soft and sweet, she sits quietly in the corner, watching, sensing, and hearing what no one says out loud. She doesn't seek the light because she is the torch. When she speaks, you don't just hear words. You feel a whole lifetime breathing through each sentence. That is what Jung once described. The one who has walked through their shadow no longer fears it. And in that moment, the true light is born. Not the kind of light that craves praise, but the kind that can't be extinguished because it comes from within. If you've ever felt like too much, if you've ever been called too complicated, if something inside you refuses to die, no matter how hard you try, know this, you are not wrong. You are simply carrying an ancient fire, waiting for its right moment to be lit. The woman no one wants to lose isn't trying to be different. She just stopped living as a copy, and because of that, she became the original. If you're still here listening to these words, it's because some part of you is remembering too. And if you feel something stirring deep in your chest, don't ignore it. Because maybe your fire wants to live again too. There's a strange kind of freedom that blossoms in a woman when she stops asking, "Do you see me?" and starts asking, "Have I truly seen myself?" In this world, many women learn to love by becoming mirrors, reflecting others' desires, becoming agreeable, sweet, worth keeping. But real love isn't born from people-pleasing. It comes from full presence. Carl Jung once said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And nowhere is that truer than in the emotional world of a woman. She isn't easygoing, she's real. The unforgettable woman doesn't easily forgive if you hurt her. She doesn't pretend to be fine when she's breaking inside. She doesn't feel shame for her anger or apologize for her tears. But that intensity isn't chaos, it's clarity. She no longer sacrifices truth to keep shallow connections alive. And because of that, she reaches you not through strategy, but through truth. She's been broken, but no longer dissolves into someone else. Once she loved so deeply, she hollowed herself out to fill another's emptiness. She once confused being needed with being loved, thought she was strong for carrying everyone's emotions, when really she was abandoning her own. But then she learned love is not something to prove. Love is not silent sacrifice until depletion. True love must begin in a place where you no longer need love to feel whole. She's learned how to hold herself while staying open. She can love someone deeply and still know when to walk away. She can cry from missing someone without needing to return. She can forgive and still remember her boundaries. Jung called this the sacred inner marriage between Anima and Animus, the union of the feminine and masculine within the soul. Once she finds that inner union, love from others is no longer salvation, but a chosen gift. Her heart is no longer held hostage. When a woman reaches emotional independence, she doesn't need attention to feel alive. Silence doesn't make her feel empty. Absence doesn't make her question her worth. She no longer reacts from fear of loss, but responds from understanding. She doesn't need to make anyone comfortable with her emotions because she has made peace with them herself. And here's the paradox: because she no longer needs to be kept, she becomes irreplaceable. If you're tired of having to hold it together just to be kept, if you've ever felt you had to shrink or distort your emotions just to keep the peace, know this: you don't need to be smaller to be loved. You only need to be real enough to stop lying to yourself. The woman no one wants to lose is the one who has learned how to stay with herself through every emotional storm. And from that depth, her heart is no longer a hostage. It becomes a temple where truth is the only price of entry. The world once told her, if you want to be loved, be gentle. And if you want to be respected, be strong, but never be both. She used to believe that. She used to think survival meant choosing. Be the soft rose or the cold steel. Be the girl who bows her head or the woman no one dares to approach. But then she realized what made her different wasn't her choice, but her refusal to be split in two. She is wind when gentleness is needed, and she is stone when firmness is called for. She doesn't need to shout to be heard, doesn't need to be spiky to protect her boundaries, doesn't need to armor herself in masculinity to be seen as strong. Her power doesn't come from control, it comes from deep presence. When she enters a room, you don't see a performance. You feel a field of energy. She no longer asks for permission to exist. She can cry in front of you without needing to explain. She can walk away without offering a polite goodbye. She can sit in silence, not from anger, but because stillness already speaks volumes. In a society where women are praised for shrinking, she has become the one who no longer folds. She doesn't shrink to make others comfortable, doesn't become small out of fear of being misunderstood, doesn't settle for love that comes with a barely acceptable label. She doesn't apologize for being many things at once, and that right there is why she cannot be replaced. The archetypes within her no longer compete for space, they've fused into wholeness. Carl Jung said that ancient symbols, archetypes live in each of us like mythic figures. The true woman has stopped performing archetypes and started embodying them. She is the maiden when her eyes light up with dreams and intuition. She is the mother when she nurtures and creates spaces of healing. She is the wild woman when she doesn't need to be understood, only respected. She is the priestess when every touch and gaze becomes sacred. She is the shadow queen when she can sit with her pain and not be devoured by it. She doesn't try to captivate, but you can't look away. Not because she's acting, not because she's trying to stand out, but because she is whole. In a world that chops people into personal brand versions, she refuses to simplify herself. She knows she wasn't born to be easily digested. She was born to be remembered, to remind the world that a woman is not a keyword, but a living symbol. Do you remember the last time you were truly yourself unedited? Do you remember what it felt like to stand in a room and not shrink, not apologize for your voice, your laughter, your tears? If you don't remember, maybe it's time to come home. The woman no one wants to lose doesn't make you feel safe because she's predictable. She makes you feel safe because she doesn't pretend. And in a world of illusions, truth is what leaves the deepest mark. There's a breathless silence, the kind that settles in when she looks back on her life and realizes for years she wasn't really living. She was auditioning, auditioning to be loved, auditioning to be kept, auditioning for the role of the worthy woman. And then she woke up not in fireworks but in collapse, when everything she had tried so hard to become fell away like makeup after a long performance. She no longer needs to be chosen because she has chosen herself. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." She had lived like a polished resume, neat, clear, easy to approve. But now she folds up every version of herself created to please and chooses to return to the original unedited. She chooses herself not out of pride but from understanding. She knows this love earned through performance will always be fragile. The harder you try to fit in, the less you know whether they love you or the illusion you're trying to maintain. Now, when she walks, each step is a quiet declaration: I'm not here to be picked. I'm here to be real. She knows if love must be begged for, it isn't love. In a world that teaches women how to flirt the right way, how to keep the spark alive, she stops. She no longer plays the game. No tactics, no formulas, no using feminine charm as a flower-wrapped trap. She offers only presence. And that presence is enough to move mountains. Not because it wins someone, but because it awakens her. She's no longer the fruit waiting to be picked, she's the one planting gardens. Ever since she stopped needing to be chosen, she's become harder to reach, but closer to herself. Her love no longer comes from hunger, but from abundance. Not from lack, but from wholeness. And the greatest paradox is this: the moment she stopped waiting to be chosen, the world began to turn and choose her. Not because she begged, but because she became the very thing the world had forgotten it was missing. She knows she was not born to be easy to swallow. Some will call her cold. Some will say she asked for too much. Some will walk away unfamiliar with a woman who doesn't need saving. And that's okay. She doesn't need everyone to choose her. She only needs one thing: to never again abandon herself. If you're still listening to this, maybe it's because you're tired of auditioning too. Maybe you've asked, am I enough? Do I deserve it? Am I doing this right? Let me say this to you, as Jung once said to himself: you do not need to become, you only need to unbecome. Unbecome the expectations, unbecome the role, unbecome the fear that you need to be chosen to matter. When you return to yourself raw, real, unpolished, you'll discover you don't need to be the right choice. You only need to be you, clear enough to choose yourself. And then she stopped trying. Stop chasing. Stop sitting in front of the mirror asking, how do I make him stay? She folded every question that ever made her heart bleed, placed her hand over her chest, and for the first time whispered, am I staying with myself? She no longer needed to walk away to the sound of applause. She didn't need her name etched into someone's heart, because she had learned the most important thing. When you show up fully, you leave an imprint that doesn't need a name to be remembered. Carl Jung once said that becoming yourself is the privilege of a lifetime, but it's a privilege not everyone dares to claim, because it doesn't arrive with praise, it arrives through unraveling. It doesn't come from the outside, it rises from the deepest layers within. And if you're still listening to these words, maybe you too are standing at that threshold where you no longer care about how to be more desirable and simply want to be more real, where you no longer fixate on how to make someone stay, but instead hunger to never abandon yourself again. You don't need to become someone else. You only need to peel away what you're not. You don't need more tricks to attract. You only need to pause and come home. Because in a world where everyone is trying so hard to be memorable, the woman no one wants to lose is the one who no longer needs to be remembered, because she never left herself long enough to need guiding back. And if this video stirred something deep inside you, leave a comment. It doesn't need to be long. It only needs to be real. Tell me, what are you returning from? How did you once beg to be chosen, and how did you finally choose yourself? This isn't just a YouTube channel. It's a space for remembering. A place where women who once dimmed themselves to survive can rise whole and say, I no longer ask for permission to exist. Hit that subscribe button. Not because I need the numbers, but because we need each other. We need a space where we no longer have to shrink to fit. A space where you can fully expand into the soul you've always been. You are not too much. You've never been not enough. You only need to be true enough to start remembering who you were before the world taught you who to become.